So the question is, how do we relate migraines and headaches? We'll just call headaches in general. How does that relate to what we eat and what we drink? And I would say there's a few different possibilities there. One is having a food allergy or intolerance. Some people will call it a delayed onset allergy. So the concept of food intolerances or food delayed onset allergies, which will contrast the difference between that and an immediate onset allergy. So that's like a peanut allergy. So if someone gets exposed to peanuts or peanut dust, they go into immediate anaphylaxis. Their tongue could swell up, their lips could swell up, and they need an EpiPen, for instance. So that would be immediate onset allergy. That's what most people are used to when we say food allergies. But what we're talking about here is a delayed onset or more of a food intolerance and not necessarily an immune reaction to it, like in the case of the peanut allergies. And the mechanism behind that is, so we eat a food, and let's say it's gluten is a common food intolerance. So we eat something that contains grains or wheats. And if the gut is having trouble, so say you have an inflamed gut just from with antibiotics, whether it's stress, whether it's poor diet in general, but you have an inflamed gut, that now the barrier of the gut or the gut lining, the skin on the inside of the gut, so to speak, is irritated and in certain parts broken down a little bit. The gut wall should be like a sponge or a filter, so it allows some things through but not others. So like the air filter in your car, you suck in air and air gets through to the motor, but you don't get leaves and dust and other junk that could damage the motor. So the gut's the same way. It's a filter. So we want to filter in and we want to absorb nutrients, but we don't want to absorb and get into the bloodstream lots of other stuff. And that other stuff being fragments of protein, such as gluten and other food components, bacterial byproducts, yeast byproducts, things of that nature. So when the gut's not working properly or it's inflamed, the gut lining is not healthy, now we can start to get some of these food particles into our bloodstream, and that creates a problem. So that can create general inflammation. So inflammation is just a general immune response to anything, and it's not very specific. So it causes inflammation there. That circulates around, that could trigger inflammation in the brain perhaps, and that could trigger headaches. Or it causes cross-reactivity. So what that means is that we have these protein fragments from something gluten, if we're sticking with that analogy or that example, that the protein structure of gluten or certain protein components is very similar to what's found in brain tissue, for instance, muscle and joint tissue, thyroid tissue. So a gluten intolerance or a leaky gut inflammation, allowing gluten to get into the bloodstream, and then the body creating some sort of immune response, we start to get friendly fire. So the body starts attacking itself, and that's a form of autoimmunity. So in the case of headaches or migraines, if you eat that gluten, it gets into your bloodstream, your body creates an immune response against those gluten protein fragments. It's similar to what it sees elsewhere in the body, including the brain. So there again, it can cause and trigger brain inflammation. Just a poor diet in general. So if you're eating the wrong foods, you're not getting the right nutrition, like B6 is needed in order to process certain compounds in the brain. If it has proper amount of B6, it'll produce good things. If we don't have enough B6, it produces more inflammation and can cause problems that way. So there's definitely a relationship between what we eat and things that can be triggered. And that's not even getting into other things. So there's something called, you've probably heard of MSG in things like Chinese food. It's also an additive, kind of like a texture, mouthfeel, flavoring added to lots of processed food. So MSG can trigger something or can cause an absorption of something called glutamate. And some people don't process that well, so they turn it into glutamic acid, which can be, it's almost like a neurotoxin, I guess you could say. It overstimulates the brain, and then that can trigger a migraine. If we're talking about food and drink, so that's some of the stuff in the food and drink that can trigger migraines. But then if we put some of those other substances aside, and we look at the effect that those food and drinks have on our blood sugar, that's also another mechanism for triggering migraines as well. So if you're eating a lot of high sugary foods, you get a spike in blood sugar. If the blood sugar goes way up, that can cause some problems and it may trigger a migraine. But I think more likely is to trigger migraine is when it crashes and you have something called hypoglycemia, and then you have a sugar crash, and then that could trigger some headaches. If you're eating foods high in sodium, like processed foods that are really high in sodium and salt and sugar, and that can drive the blood pressure up. Caffeine, other things found in foods that could drive the blood pressure up, and then the high blood pressure can trigger migraines as well. Or just as likely, low blood pressure can trigger migraines as well. So foods definitely have a relationship to triggering headaches.